What if you could travel back in time and experience Africa as it was over 50 years ago? That's exactly what Barry Maughan did, driving from Alexandria, Egypt to the southern tip of South Africa long before GPS and guidebooks ruled the road. In this episode, Barry shares stories from his remarkable journey captured in his book, Beneath the African Sun. Buckle up for an adventure through history, humanity, and the raw heart of a continent. Welcome to Journey with Jake. This is a podcast about adventure and how through our adventures we can overcome the challenges of life that come our way. While I expect you will learn some things about different adventures, this show will entertain you. Each episode will feature a different guest or guests as they share experiences and stories from the different adventures they have been on. Not only will you be entertained, but you will also hear the failures and trials each guest faces and what they have done or are doing to overcome the hardships that come their way. My goal is to take each of us on a journey through the experiences of my guests with the hope that you'll be entertained and inspired to overcome your day-to-day challenges. After all, it's not all about the destination as it is about the journey. I'm your host, Jake Bushman, and I'm so glad you're here. Each week, I get the chance to sit down with some incredible people who share their unique stories of adventure, resilience, and the past that shaped them. Before we dive into Barry Maughan's unforgettable journey through Africa, just a quick bit of housekeeping. Be sure to follow me on Instagram at Journey with Jake Podcast for behind-the-scenes content and episode updates. Journey with Jake is also part of the Podmatch Podcast Network, helping connect voices and stories that inspire. And if you haven't already, check out the Journey with Jake YouTube channel. It's a great way to watch the full recording of today's conversation if you prefer video over audio. Today's episode takes us back over 50 years as Barry recounts his drive from Alexandria, Egypt to the southern tip of Africa, an adventure captured beautifully in his book, Beneath the African Sun. If you enjoy this episode, make sure to check out episode 108 with Chris Donaldson, who rode his motorcycle around the world in the 1970s. Two different paths, same adventurous spirit. Let's get to my conversation with Barry. All right, I'm excited today. I've got Barry. Is it Maughan? How do you say your last name, Barry? I want to make sure I get this right.
Maughan, yes. Call me anything except late for supper, as my mom used to say.
Right on. Barry Maughan, welcome to the show. Welcome to Journey with Jake.
Well, thank you, Jake. Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure. I've listened to some of your podcasts, and it's an honor to be on with you.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you. Africa. We're going to really dive into Africa. I think your heart's in Africa. You've spent a lot of time in Africa. We're going to dive into Africa. Before we do that, before we get to your adventure and what you got going on there, tell me a little bit about Barry, just some background information. Where are you from? Where you grew up? A little bit about your family, that sort of thing.
Well, I grew up in Australia, the outback of Australia. Was born just 9 days after Pearl Harbor, so I'm long in the tooth. Came to Canada at the age of 10, and then through a marriage of convenience, my mom got me over to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where I grew up, and got a bachelor's in journalism advertising from Boston University in 65, and then in 67, got a master's in journalism management from Oklahoma State. And then bounced around, which I would recommend for any aspiring radio broadcaster, at a lot of dawn to dusk radio stations where you learn it all. You learn to rip and read news, go network, do remotes, do all the checks out at the station, do a little bit of DJ work, and just you learn the trade. And that's where I would recommend anyone who wants to aspire to a career in broadcasting should start. And started that way, and then started traveling, ended up in Ethiopia, saw a radio station there, driving in, Radio Voice of the Gospel, said I can do that. And the guy hired me. 6 years later, moved on to Radio Australia, then New Zealand Broadcasting. And the last 25 years was with the Voice of America in Washington, where I was in the English to Africa service. And I was proud to be the chief of that service for the last 5 years of my career. So here I am.
Wow, a long career in broadcasting, radio. Amazing.
Yes.
Here you are.
Jake, they always said I had the perfect face for radio.
That's what I was saying about podcasting. And now I put stuff out on YouTube. So I'm like, I don't know if, I don't know if it works for it, but hey, at least we got this thing going, which is fun. So I enjoy this part of it. I've always enjoyed this because I enjoy hearing people's stories and who they are. And I'm excited to hear your story. We're going to talk a lot about this trip you took along the length of Africa, the African continent, in a VW like bus, little mini bus. What first sparked your desire to travel to Africa? And before we get into that, what was your family situation like? Were you married at the time? What kind of, you have any kids? Kind of what's the situation there?
Yes, my wife and I were married, didn't have any children. We were in kind of dead-end jobs and working in New York City. I was with Benton and Bowles Advertising, hawking such things as Crest toothpaste and Honeycomb cereals and the rest of it. And she was in another position in the city, and we really didn't feel like we were going anywhere and just wanted to change. And we started saying, well, why don't we just travel a little bit? So we saved our money and took a boat over to Antwerp, Germany. And before that, we had purchased a Volkswagen camper bus and arrived there with the 7 duffel bags and stuffed everything into the camper bus. And off we went to Switzerland, the usual tour of Europe, then up to Norway, and I had some great adventures in Norway. And then it started getting cold. And we said, it's time to head south, young man. So we decided maybe Portugal or Spain. And then as we learned more about the crowded conditions there, we said, someone whispered in our ear, hey, go to Morocco. So never taking the easy way, across the Straits of Gibraltar down to Morocco. Let's take a boat trip around the littoral of the Mediterranean. And we ended up in Alexandria and said, well, let's just drive across North Africa to Morocco. Well, we were just one day away from heading west to Libya. And then a fellow named Muammar Gaddafi decided to stage a coup and to close the borders. And we didn't know for how long. And so, it was a journey of serendipities, so many serendipities. Then we said, well, should we just turn tail and go back to Europe? And that was kind of like a defeatist attitude. I had met this chap on the boat with nothing better to do, just I'll talk to a post if it'll stand still. And turned out that he was a general, Egyptian general. Well, in the Middle East, generals are a dime a dozen. But anyway, we got to chatting. His name was Ibrahim el-Tahawi. And we got to chatting and kind of hit it off. And so he gave me his card, and I figured, well, that's a nice way for him just to tell you, yeah, when in Cairo, look me up. Yeah, right. Anyway, the next day, he was always surrounded with kind of shadowy looking military types. And one of them sidled up to me and said, oh, General El-Tahawi would like the pleasure of your company again over dinner. I said, okay, good enough. Anyway, so we landed in Alexandria. I heard the news about Gaddafi and said, well, we might as well just head south to Cairo, see the pyramids and whatever, maybe turn around and go back. Well, it was in the middle of the War of Attrition, one of many wars that the Egyptians and their allies were fighting against Israel. So it was a fractious time. But I arrived in Cairo and couldn't find a place to park the camper. And so I said, well, here's this guy who says he's the president of the Young Men's Muslim Association. Okay, akin to the Young Men's Christian Association over here. Wrong. But anyway, I didn't know any better. So I said, we were desperate. We needed a place to put the camper. And my wife said, well, while I'm staying with friends, why don't you go on over and see if you can talk to General El-Tahawi? So I arrive at these palatial offices in this high-rise building, and I expected to give my card, and a couple of days later say, well, he's got an appointment between 6 and 7 p.m. He'll come to see you then. Well, she walks in, hands the card to General El-Tahawi. He comes out, Mr. Maughan, come on in. Well, I didn't know what I was getting in for, but when you're introduced to half of the Egyptian cabinet, Mahmoud Fauzi, the minister of war, the health minister, this guy, that guy, counterintelligence. And I figured, oh my God, I'm out of my depth. We're going to be talking about politics and economics. No, they just want to know how I liked Egypt. And then General El Tahawi said, well, is there anything that you'd like to see in Cairo? Well, the Cairo Museum, the Sphinx, pyramids, yada, yada, yada. Okay, he picks up the phone and then says, okay, 5 minutes later, Lieutenant Basri, lieutenant, if we say here, lieutenant, and he said, now, well, I'd like you to meet Lieutenant Basri. Okay. I said, for the next 10 days, he's going to be your personal guide, and he will show up at 8 o'clock each morning in an air-conditioned limousine. And it was like a magical carpet ride. I said, well, I've got one other problem. I got to park my camper, all due respect. So, it has tires in the morning. And he said, oh, no problem. There's this fancy Gazera club out in one of the Nile Islands. He gave me keys to the private part of the club, and I parked my car there, and that's the camper, and that's where Lieutenant Basri met us every morning for 10 days, and we just got shown Cairo like it's never been shown before. Now, I must confess, it was in the middle of a war, so we didn't see it at its best. For instance, the Cairo Museum had sandbags and taped windows and the whole thing, and we didn't see the King Tut exhibit because it was down in the basement forever. But man, and then we went to an opera, all kinds of food, never paid a dime. And that wasn't okay. Serendipity. Thank you very much, General Al Tahawi. He says, well, where are you going to go from here? I said, well, we might want to go to Aswan. No, impossible for the camper. But he says, here's 2 first-class tickets. You go down to Aswan. I'll put your camper on a flat car, and I'll have someone guard it. And in due course, it will arrive in Aswan, so you can continue your journey south. Well, we got down to Aswan and did our thing, and every day we'd look out and nothing. And then one day, lo and behold, into the yard came the train, and one of the flat cars sat Bridget, our combi bus. And there in front of it was this guy with an automatic machine gun and a little bit of water for him to drink. And he had stayed and guarded that the whole 500 miles south from Cairo to Aswan. So it was a tale of serendipity, and it just continued on after that. And who'd have thunk it, as they say, that you meet someone and you just strike up a conversation, and it turns out that General El Tahawi, the reason he had all those guys in his office, he was the right hand man to President Abdul Gamal Nasser. Right hand man. I didn't know it. I just talk to anyone who comes along.
I love this story because it reflects, when you travel and when you get out there and see things. Yeah, you do just talk to people. You don't know who you're talking to. You don't know. You thought you were just talking to, there's all kinds of generals here in Egypt and what's going on. And so you didn't know any better. And
Exactly.
look what it did.
And if I might say, Jake, just to kind of finish that story, that wasn't the end of our friendship. Every time I went on assignment to Cairo, he would invite me to his apartment or to his home, and we would talk, not politics. He loved the Egyptian football club, El Ahly, and I like Zamalek. Well, they're very bitter rivals. We go round and round and round on that like a couple of kids. And then as he got older, and then one day I learned that he had passed, and it was like losing a very dear friend because he never asked anything of me. He didn't ask me to use my platform on the Voice of America for any pro-Egyptian rhetoric or whatever. We were just friends. And when we got together, I wasn't a broadcaster, and he wasn't a high official in the Egyptian government. We were just buddies, just hung
Just
out.
friends. I love that.
Just because of a chance conversation.
It's amazing. Starting off in Egypt, was there any tie to Africa, or was it simply because we wanted to get warmer and it was getting colder in Europe?
No, it was because Morocco was the place for snowbirds, if you will, to head south and spend in Morocco. It's a great place, Marrakesh and Casablanca and all the rest of it. Nice place. But we never got there because of Gaddafi. So, I mean,
So what year was this? Let me take us back, because this here's what's amazing too. I've talked to a lot of adventurers all the time, but people have the modern convenience of today. This was back before you know social media and before people are posting pictures and you have help. You didn't have the conveniences of today.
exactly, Jake. That's an excellent point because one of, not jumping ahead, but one of the questions I get asked the most is, would you do it today? And not to put myself up on a pedestal, because we were innocents abroad. We were just day by day, we were kind of faking it until we were making it. But it was 1969. There was none of the electronic tethers that you have today. No GPS, no Facebook or any cell phones or anything like that, or sat phones. How did you find your way? Well, a lot of times we're out in the bush, and my wife would look up at which she's a mathematician, she'd look up in the sky and say, okay, got to go south here. Not a lot of roads to choose from anyway. There was no, I mean, just tracks. Go this way. Or you'd ask someone, and I say this in all the love in my heart, Africans, like a lot of people elsewhere in the world, they tend to want to tell you what they think you want to hear. Should we go this way? Yes, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Go that way. Well, they may not know, but they know, they think you want to hear that. And so they'll go ahead and tell you that, you know? So it was more of an adventure. It was more of an adventure in many, many ways. And to answer that question, no, I wouldn't do it today. Not just because of that, but Africa's changed, not the people of Africa. As I always say, the only problems we had was not with the people, never had a problem. It was the government. It was
Yeah.
crossing borders and stuff like that. That's where you had to mind your P's and Q's. And you had to be careful because this was the era of Idi Amin in Uganda. And funny story about crossing the border into Uganda. We give our passports over, and I'm looking and I see, wait a minute, this guy's got them upside down, but he's very carefully going through them. And my wife started to giggle, and I kind of gave her a nudge, stamped them, stamps are upside down. He couldn't read, you see? So, yeah, yeah, if I start to mock him, what happens then? You don't know.
Yeah.
And this was the era of Idi Amin. When I was in Ethiopia, buddies with the Ugandan ambassador to Addis. And he had got word that he was being considered to be the next foreign minister. Well, the first two foreign ministers under Amin had ended up in the Murchison Falls as crocodile bait. Okay. So he said, well, if I'm named, I'm on the first plane to London. And would you help get my family? And he was named, and he was gone, you know?
Wow.
And I mean, Amin was the kind of person you could be in the room with him and he could just look at you out of his mind. He would think, I don't like that person. And you're in jeopardy. He was a crazy guy. But anyway, that's the long answer to your question.
Well, and let's stay on those same lines for a minute. Not having the modern conveniences, not having GPS, all that good stuff. Crossing borders, which was tricky just because of governments and things. Did you have any moments where you had fear or you were scared, or were there moments that crept in?
Well, see, I had the first half of the trip was from Egypt to Ethiopia. I'd lived and worked in Ethiopia. So I got a measure of the continent. Not that Ethiopia is the same as the rest of the continent, it's not, but I got a measure of how you go about your business. You don't act the big Ferengi. You don't try to lord it over people. You know when to be not subservient, but just to be humble. And this held me in good stead, and us both in good stead the rest of the way south. because, yeah, there were tricky times, but from Ethiopia on down to South Africa, we had a hidden weapon, a 1-year-old towhead. And Kevin was born in Ethiopia. The first half of the trip, no children. Then, whoops, something happened, too much time somewhere. And then Kevin came along and he ingratiated himself because he was a towhead. Had snow white hair, blue eyes, and in many places, this was not seen very often by those people, and they were entranced by him. And so he opened a lot of doors to us. But I think it was just treating people as you would like to be treated yourself, and not acting the big shot. That gets you a long way.
You mentioned Kevin. So you get to Ethiopia and you spent some time in Ethiopia before continuing south. Kevin comes along. And how old was Kevin when you started the journey south? Would you say 1-year-old? Is that what you said?
He celebrated his first birthday at a nature park in Nairobi, Kenya.
I
So
love it.
the first part of the trip, he was like 10 months. But, you know, I don't want anyone saying child abuse, child. No, 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 no. There's a well in the back of the camper where my wife first lined it with foam rubber and then put blankets down and the whole thing. In the first 5 miles, and fell down once in there, padded and everything, didn't hurt himself. And he learned to hang on. It's amazing what they can do at that age. And so I mean it was duck soup. It really was. And my wife, now former wife, I can't say enough about Suzanne. She took wonderful care of us, and in so many cases where I had just about given up, well, this is the end of the trip, then she came up with an ingenious way for us to continue. Let me give you an example, Jay. We're in Aswan and we had to board the Aswan Queen. Well, if you've ever seen my book, you'll see a picture of the Aswan Queen, which is kind of like a couple of garbage scows put together. So, but we had to get our camper onto one area to carry it down to Wadi Halfa, or up the Nile to Wadi Halfa. Okay. Well, we get to it and it's got a stanchion across the top. And I'm stopped and I said, we can't get on. The stanchion can't be moved. They won't move it, but we can't get on. This is my non-technical brain at work here. Suzanne just looks and she says, well, wait a minute. We just take a little bit of air out of each tire. Not too much because we don't want to be on flat tires. A little bit. Slid right under. You see? So it took two of us. It took her acumen and when it came to technology and all that. And then I think, humbly I say, I'm a people person, and that kind of helped us a lot of times as well. So we're a good combination, but we didn't get in the way of each other. We let the other's strength come forth. So,
Great example.
but it was just a series of serendipities, Jake. It was a series of serendipities that just kept us going further and further and further south. And to the point where, after living in Ethiopia for 3 years, I said, let's just go the rest of the way south, collecting all not only the visas and everything, but we had to have what they call a carnet de passage. And that's where you are telling the country in which Bridget is entering that you will, if you sell her there, then you will pay all the taxes and yada, yada, yada. And that's the only way that they will allow you to bring the car into that country. So, you get all that squared away, but a lot of it is you've got to be savvy because a lot of the visas are only good for a certain amount of time. You can't lollygag, say, in Tanzania and then show up at the Malawi border and your visa's out of date, because that just doesn't work. I've said this, as long as you have all your paperwork scrupulously in order, you're fine.
Keep that
But if you
paperwork in
don't,
order.
yeah. And I think it works that way in a lot of things, right?
Absolutely. I wanted to ask another thing about Kevin, because here you are traveling with your 1-year-old son. I read somewhere that you called him the goodwill ambassador, and you mentioned he opened doors for you. Do you have an example of how he did that, or how he was an ambassador,
Well,
opened a door for you?
one of the most poignant stories, and I called the chapter "The Oneness of Love." We're looking for a place one day to have lunch, and with a little privacy. That we were didn't want to see anyone. It was just it'd be nice just to have a place for quiet and not have anyone. Well, you've really learned in Africa, and you can be out in the middle of nowhere, and you we got the camper top up, and uh, Suzanne's got Kevin in the jerry pack, and she's doing lunch, and you just get this feeling someone's watching us, and then you look, and this is very respectful and no harm. This is a ring of people watching you. Um, there was this one. Well, there were in area was populated by the Dinka ethnic group. They're tall, they're extremely dark. They're Nilotic people, herders, pastoralists. Anyway, she had a baby about the same size as Kevin. She was fascinated, and she got closer and closer. And Kevin and Suzanne, they had this instinct. There was nothing to be afraid of here. She came closer and closer, and then she reached out her hand and so lovingly just touched Kevin's hair and his face, because she maybe had never seen someone like him before, you know? And then the two of them changed babies. And people always say to me, well, why didn't you take a picture? This was back in talking about these electronic tethers. This was back in the SLR days. Okay, wait a minute, stand still. I got to get the f-stop done. Or nowadays, you just take a couple of surreptitious, cell phone photos, right? No. And I say to people, I didn't want to spoil the moment. It was touching. It was so touching. And it just showed us this is the humanity. A man, yes, she's dark with her baby, white with her baby, but they exchanged them because they would never do anything to harm the other baby.
I
So
love
that
that.
was one example of how he opened doors. I could give you other ones, but that was like we're in Lesotho, and there's another picture in the book where he's trying on one of the conical hats, which are traditional Lesotho hats. And all the young ladies came around and were just so fascinated to see this little baby. He was walking by that time and trying on this hat. And we got to meet their relatives and whatever. He was an entree because he was, and he just had this sense he wasn't afraid. They showed him no malice. He had no reason to be afraid. And time again, he was our entree to always good things.
I love it. These are great examples. When you think about your time in Africa, what's something about the real Africa that you feel maybe modern travelers or people today miss out on or don't quite understand?
But it's a kind of a homogenized look at the continent. Yes, you're going to see all the animals and all the people, but there's always a tinge in my mind, and maybe I'm biased, of the mondo cane, the exotic, deepest, darkest Africa of Lord Stanley and David Livingstone and Mondo Park and the rest of them. And a lot of people think that Africa is all jungle. No, the vast amount of Africa is savanna. And you got the iconic acacia trees, and boy, can they rip up your tires. That's another story. But they all think it's like the Congo jungle, and it's not. Yes, there are vast areas of it, but there's also vast areas like in our travels, I would say that we only touched on the jungle part of it maybe for 2 or 3 days. Because if you look down the spine where we went, it's all savanna. It's all savannah, beautiful, but it's not what everybody thinks. As I wrote in one of the chapters, we were in the part of the Congo, just a little bit of it, right next to Uganda. And I expected to hear Tarzan, swinging from branch to branch with Jane because it had that feel. If you read that chapter, it will give you a feel that you were in the jungle. The smells, the detritus, the butterflies, the animals that you couldn't see. You could just hear off in the distance the hoots of the monkeys and whatever. And that gave you the feel of the tropical forested jungle Africa. But most of the time, it was savanna.
Kind of staying on that same line, jungle, savanna, different spots. Were there any parts of this trip that was just like awe-inspiring, whether it's the vista or whether it was an experience? Any things like that you could share?
Well, one of the chapters, Jake, is I go through my top 10 views of Africa. And we had to drive the desert road coming from Alexandria to Cairo because the agricultural road was being used to park Egyptian MiGs so the Israelis couldn't bomb them. So that was off limits. But we're just driving along. We come up over a rise, and there are the pyramids. And they were off in the distance. I'm not saying we could reach out and touch. They were probably miles away, but it still brings chills. And we just not supposed to stop, but we had to stop and just view it. And I knew the pictures wouldn't turn out because they were so far away. That was probably number one. Number two, Victoria Falls on low water, because if you go high water, you don't see anything because of the mist thrown up by the millions of gallons of water just tumbling 300 feet, forming the border between Zambia and what was then Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. There's one spot where the prevailing winds bring the mists, and it's like a small jungle in the middle of dry, barren acacia. And you are given like boots, and you're given slickers and a hat, because if you stand there long enough, you're going to get soaked. It's like not even a mile, probably 200 square feet, where just the winds take it all the time. The mists from the falls and the noise, even at low water. It's just, and we knew we were getting close to them 5 miles away because you can hear them. So that Kilimanjaro, the tallest freestanding mountain in the world, and just sitting in Amboseli National Park, and we got our cool ones out there, and we're sitting there, and we get out in front. You got the zebras, and then off on one side against the skyline, a herd of elephants, and then Kilimanjaro up ahead of you, and you say, "Can't get much better than this." This is amazing. And then lots of other ones, just enough to keep you interested in looking around the next bend, because there's always something.
Absolutely. Looking back, because this was, 50 years ago, 50 plus years ago, how has this trip shaped who you are today?
I wouldn't have done it any differently. I think that the reason that we were successful, and I won't say unscathed because that kind of puts a pejorative on it, but if I could go back 50 years, I'd do it all again. And I probably wouldn't change a thing because the matrix was just right. Kevin was there. He's now, 55, and he still can't believe that we put him through this. And he survived. But no, the continent is a different place today. I'd say the average folk, and I write this in the book, we're in the outback of Ethiopia, and came across this family in their little tukul, which is a round hut home. And we got to talking to them, and they invited, as did most Africans, they will give you half of what they don't have. And it was some sort of a wat, which is Ethiopian for stew. We were eating it, and there was a few crunchy bits, and Suzanne didn't want to eat it. And I said to her, "Hey, you eat it. It's been boiled. It's not going to kill you. It's probably, it's a little chewy, Anyway, we got to talking. He knew a smattering of English. I had a little bit of kitchen Amharic at that point. That's a national language. And through stops and starts, I I got from him what most people want in their life. They wanted 3 square meals on the table for their children. They wanted as little government intrusion in their life, and they didn't want their children to be shipped off to die in some foreign war. Well, hello. Again, the humanity of man. I can identify with that, regardless of your politics. I mean, these are visceral things that are inculcated in most people that they want for their family. I want better for my family, as he did, and I learned time and time again in just getting down and talking to people, not just traveling through the continent, but stopping and talking to people. You learn a lot, even though, their English is not so good. And of course, my Swahili is non existent apart from Jambo Bwana, Sante San, and whatever. But from fits and starts, you kind of get a sense that these are good folks. Their socioeconomic situation might be different. That's all right. But if you meet them on their level, again, getting back to what I said, if you meet them on their level and don't play the big I am, then you're going to get a lot more from them. Many, many times you see one picture and there you see us mired on the highway between Addis and Kenya, which is now a paved road. But this will show you was this thick black fika soil. And we needed people to push us through. Because okay, so I had a big rubber hose and I stuck it in the over the exhaust pipe, and he stood on the back bumper holding the pipe up, and across I went. But could I give him anything? No, no, no. Part of the fun. So yeah, we made a lot of the trip on our own nous, as we say in Australia, savvy, whatever. But a lot of it was with an immense amount of goodwill and help from the locals we met along the way. As long as we met them at their level, in their
At their
terms.
level. You've mentioned it a few times. The book. Tell me about the book. What inspired you to write it? And I think it just came out recently. I think it came out in May. So it's been 50 some years since this adventure. What inspired you to do this?
Well, I've written a couple of other books, and I mention them only because there was one common thread. As you get to be my age in nearing 84, and you want not your legacy, but you want your children, grandchildren, great grandchildren to have a sense of maybe what you did in your life, not to make it any big deal. So the getting to this book, Beneath the African Sun, it started out as, back in the day, I'll get behind my typewriter and type out 20 or 30 pages and go down to the local Kinko's or Staples and staple it together and then put a cover on it. And then I'll make 20 or 30 copies and hand it out to my family and whatever. And then my daughter and son said, Pops, I think this might make a book. Yeah, okay. Well, I kept putting it off because it was such a major thing. But then about 4 years ago, I said, no, I've got to get into this because I'm not getting any younger. And so started just chapter by chapter, piecing it together. And when I look at all the work that we put in and then finding uh, going through the 5,000 slides and picking 39 from that and placing them, and of course, getting the proper editors and having a fantastic publishing assistant, Amanda Miller. She's amazing. She has the technical know-how. That was my biggest challenge, Jake. It was not the words, it's the transmission of that in today's Collins. And I haven't had a clue. So she's helped me. I couldn't have done it without her. So it started as just a very, very small project, and it just mushroomed, just grew and grew and grew. And then I started looking through journals and remembering funny incidents, not so funny, whatever. And then the idea of a full blown book started to make sense to me. And so I just took it a step at a time. You know, we have the African saying, how do you eat an elephant ear sandwich? A bite at a time.
But
That's how I did it. Seriously, just a bite at a time.
here you are at 84 years young, and you got it done.
Yeah, it's a wonderful sense of accomplishment. I would not be remiss in saying that when I saw it actually published and out on the various channels, internet channels, I shed a tear because I never really thought that I knew I could do it. I've been a writer all my life. Was could I do it at my age? And I did it, and now I've got another one that I'm thinking about. So we did Zan and myself did a transcontinental journey around Australia in a camper. And so I wrote a lot of chapters at the time. And so I think, look, you got to keep going, Jake. You got to keep going. You know, I mean, yeah, that's what, if you're a writer, you're a writer. If you're a podcaster like yourself, you got to keep going, you know? And
Absolutely.
sometimes people say to me, well, how many copies have you sold? I don't know. You see, that's never been the goal. Seriously. Yeah. And I'm not joking with you. And I'm gratified with the number that it is. And it's number one in a lot of bestseller lists, too. That's humbling, and it's I'm happily looking at that, but it's really not, as long as it's in the hands of my family and my good friends, then that's I have to tell you this, Jake, is quick. Publisher's assistant, wonderful, never disagrees with me. Well, when she saw how many free books I was buying, she said, Barry, the idea is to sell these books. Just give it away. This is the way I am. I know it sounds like I'm the big I am, because this harkens back to my original intent. It was not to make a lot of money. If that be the case, great, take it. But if not, I've done it. And the friends who mean something to me and my family and my children, nine grandchildren, well, then they'll pass it along, and maybe they'll know more about the continent. Maybe go back, and if they go back, they'll go back with the proper spirit. If that Africa is still, you know, has any semblance of what I encountered, you know,
Sure.
and you know, people are people.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that because it's inspiring to me as a podcaster, and I've been doing it for 3.5 years now. I don't want to stop either because people like you who tell me your story and your journey, it's inspiring to me, and I don't want to see that end. So I appreciate you sharing that, and it just kind of got me all motivated again. So thank you for that.
No, I mean, and look, I would say to you, as I've said to the other young people that I've talked to, is, you know, just hang in there and don't give up. Because if it's a labor of love, as I tell my couple of granddaughters who are runners, one with the University of Virginia and one doing very well in high school, I said, just run with passion and joy. If you've got passion in your life, you've got it all. And I think that I have a passion for Africa, not with rose-colored glasses on. I realize that there's situations there, but having rubbed shoulders the length of the continent with people, Muslim, Christian, animist, doesn't matter. Whatever the language, they're they're good folks if you give them half the opportunity. If you do, good folks. And so I would just say to young podcasters like yourself, yeah, don't give up, man. You know, just to keep at it, and as long as you enjoy it, you know.
Absolutely, and I love it. So yeah, that's no signs of me stopping anytime soon, and it's because of people like
No,
you.
I've listened to a couple of, and that's why I was excited to come on with you, because you know, you're good, and I can tell that you're interested in your subject. You're not just doing it for the sake of doing it. Say, well, I'm a podcaster, you know, and not. I can sense passion. As I always said to my broadcasters at the Voice of America before, I said, look, I can teach you mic technique. I can teach you how to speak from the diaphragm. But I said, I can't open up the top of your head and pour in a pound of passion. You have to bring that to the table. And if you bring that to the table, then you'll be successful. It may not be overnight, but you will be successful. And so, I laud people like yourself, really.
Thank you. Appreciate that. You're 84 now. What are the plan? Any other plans? You said you might write another book. You ever plan to go back to
Well,
Africa? What
yes,
are some of the plans?
I retired early from the Voice of America in 2000. So in the last 25 years, I've been writing, wrote a couple of the books, one being about my mom growing up in Australia. So they know that part of their heritage. Done a series of old 1 minute segments of old songs that I broadcast, like, for a Scottish radio station, Riverdee Radio. And so I did that for 2 or 3 years. What else? I love to email. I like to keep in contact with some colleagues, a few that are remaining around the world. And we like to get on and chat. And I just love talking to people. I love communications. I truly believe if there was more communications and travel among people, we'd have far less of the problems that we have today. Because if you understand people, like I don't understand all the people of Africa. I mean, you can't just generalize like that. But if you get a sense of traveling the world, and I've visited 63 countries and worked in 41. Not for a long time, but enough to kind of get a sense that folks are folks are folks. And I just want to keep doing that. I just want to keep reaching out to people in any way I can, inspiring if I can, like with you and other people that I talk to, because I like to see passion in any form. It doesn't have to be something that I identify. If you're passionate about mathematics, which I'm a dolt at, great. I can still sense it the way you talk about it, you see. So, yeah, I'm just going to continue to do that until the curtain comes down. Who knows how long that'll be, but I've lived a good life. I've been very happy with my life. I've taught a lot of journalists, and they're continuing to spread the word. I was fortunate enough to get a lot of publicity. We were only I was one of four journalists embedded in Ethiopia who covered the entire coup that brought down Emperor Haile Selassie. And then I was one of the few journalists up in Wallo province to cover the drought and subsequent famine, where hundreds of thousands of people died. And I was able to, through words, start bringing that to the world. And then Jonathan Dimbleby of the BBC came in with the power of television, and that really not. And so I've been in the midst of some pretty good stories, and I just like to continue to reach out to communicators wherever I find them and just give them encouragement and help in any way I can. Because I needed people's help along the way, and that's the problem. A lot of folks, when they make it, they pull the ladder up behind them, and you can't do that. You have to continue to remember how you got there. And I had a lot of help in getting where I took advantage of it the proper way, but I still had the help. And I just want to continue to give that back.
Barry, this has been just amazing for me to get to know you, who you are, your adventure through Africa, and just in life in general. I mean, you've had a lot of adventures, not just with Africa, but a lot of places. My final question for you: what does adventure mean to Barry?
Searching for the heretofore unknown. Adventure is not being afraid of what's around the next bend. Adventure is a willingness to embrace whomever you meet. Adventure is always seeking that next horizon. Adventure is loving whomever you come in contact with. Adventure is of the heart. Adventure is born in you, or that's not to say you can't acquire it. I think a lot of people have more of that adventurous spirit. And I just thank goodness that my first wife, Suzanne, had that same adventurous spirit, because if I've asked 100 women, would they do the same thing that Suzanne did? And no. Well, they said more than that, but no. Are you kidding me? What? You crazy? And so I was fortunate that my adventurous spirit coincided and coalesced with with Suzanne's. It's just wanting to know what other people are about and learning their proclivities and learning what they like and what they dislike, and not being afraid to open your mouth and say hi. And the good things can come out of that. That's where the next adventure is. It's just the next words out of your mouth.
Barry, thank you so much for coming on Journey with Jake.
Jake, I couldn't be happier. You've got your craft down, and I can only wish you the very, very best. And anyone who would like more, just Beneath the African Sun, my website's Barry Maughan, all one word, BarryMaughan.com. And that's over with. I've given the plug. But I truly, I'm a proud to plug this book, as any author will say. I can guarantee you that you will come away with a better, more cleaner understanding of what the true Africa hopefully is today, but 50 years ago. And if I have accomplished that, then that's all I want.
A big thank you to Barry Maughan for sharing his incredible story and giving us a glimpse into what it was like to travel across Africa more than 50 years ago. If you want to dive deeper into Barry's journey, be sure to visit barrymaughan.com. That's BarryMaughan.com, where you can purchase his book, Beneath the African Sun, and learn more about his adventures. Thank you so much, Barry. If this episode resonated with you, please take a moment to share Journey with Jake with a friend, leave a rating or review, and help spread these amazing stories of resilience, exploration, and personal growth. Your support truly makes a difference. And don't miss next week's episode with the inspiring Michaela Leeper. We'll explore her world of competitive swimming and coaching and talk about how adventure and purpose show up even at a young age. It's a refreshing reminder that you're never too young or too old to embrace the journey. And just remember, it's not always about the destination as it is about the journey. Take care, everybody.